August 1945. A group of German female prisoners of war sat in an American POW camp and burst out laughing when guards served them grilled corn. "That's what you feed to pigs." They mocked their Nazi training, telling them Americans were too weak and stupid to know real food. But when hunger forced them to take that first bite, everything they'd been taught about America, about the war, and about who was really winning began to crumble. What did that single ear of corn reveal about American power that destroyed a lifetime of propaganda? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. August 1945. The war was ending, and Germany was dying. In the streets of Hamburg and Berlin, mothers stood in bread lines for 6 hours hoping to get one small loaf. Children searched through rubble looking for anything to eat. Some people boiled grass to make soup. Others ate tulip bulbs from their gardens. The great German Reich that promised victory was now a land of empty stomachs and broken promises. Greta stood in line with 29 other German women on the deck of an American ship. She was 26 years old and had worked in a weapons factory near Hamburg for 3 years. She wore a dirty gray uniform that used to belong to the German auxiliary forces. The uniform hung loose on her thin frame now. She had lost 15 pounds in the last 2 months. But Greta kept her back straight and her chin high. She had been taught that Germans were strong, that they were better than others. Especially better than soft Americans who knew nothing about sacrifice or discipline. Next to Greta stood Liesel, a young nurse from a small village in Bavaria. Liesel was only 22 and had gentle eyes that seemed too sad for someone so young. She held a small cloth bag containing everything she owned in the world: one spare shirt, a broken comb, and a faded photograph of her parents. She said little during the long voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. She just watched the endless gray water and wondered what would happen to them in America. Frau Schneider, the oldest woman in the group at 48, knew some English from her school days. The Americans had chosen her to help translate. She stood near the front of the line, her weathered face showing no emotion. She had seen too much in this war to be surprised by anything anymore. Her husband had died in Russia. Her son was missing in France. She had nothing left to lose and nothing left to hope for. The women had been captured 3 months earlier when American forces pushed through Western Germany. For weeks they waited in temporary camps in France, sleeping on cold ground, eating watery soup once a day. Then came the announcement. They would be sent to prisoner of war camps in America. The women did not know whether to feel afraid or relieved. America seemed like another planet, impossibly far away from the war and destruction they knew. The ship journey took 12 days. The women slept in the cargo hold on thin mattresses. They got 2 meals a day, which was more than most of them had eaten in Germany for the past year. But the food was strange. White bread that tasted like air, canned meat that came in tins, and coffee that was weak and pale. Still, it was food. Their stomachs stopped hurting for the first time in months. When the ship finally docked, the women were loaded onto trains. They traveled for 2 more days through the American countryside that seemed impossible. Fields of wheat stretched as far as they could see, golden and thick. Cows grazed in green pastures, fat and healthy. Barns stood painted red and white, not destroyed by bombs. Small towns passed by the windows with houses that had glass in all their windows and cars parked in driveways. Greta stared out the window and felt something tight in her chest. This country was not supposed to look like this. America was supposed to be suffering too. The war was supposed to have hurt everyone. The train stopped at a small station in Texas. August heat hit them like a wall when they stepped onto the platform. It was hotter than anything they had known in Germany. American soldiers, young men in clean uniforms, directed them onto trucks. The soldiers did not yell or push. They simply pointed and waited. This confused the women. Where was the cruelty they expected? Where was the revenge? The camp sat 5 miles outside a small Texas town. Tall fences surrounded rows of wooden barracks. Guard towers stood at each corner. But when the trucks drove through the gates, the women saw something that made them whisper to each other in disbelief. The buildings were freshly painted. The dirt paths between barracks were swept clean. There were actual toilets in small buildings, not just holes in the ground. There were sinks with running water that came out clear and cold when you turned the handles. Greta walked into the barracks, assigned to her group, and stopped in the doorway. Real beds lined the walls, each with a mattress that was thick and stuffed with something soft. White sheets lay folded at the end of each bed. Actual sheets, clean and whole. A small table sat between every 2 beds. The windows had screens to keep out bugs. The wooden floor, though simple, had been scrubbed recently. She could smell soap and pine cleaner. Liesel sat on a bed and pressed her hand against the mattress. It gave under her touch, soft and springy. She had slept on stone floors and hard ground for so long that she had forgotten what a real bed felt like. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She did not want the others to see her cry. Frau Schneider walked slowly through the barracks, her eyes taking in every detail. She had expected punishment. She had expected to be treated the way Germany had treated its prisoners. Cold floors, thin blankets, barely enough food to survive. But this place looked almost comfortable. She felt a warning bell ring in her mind. This had to be a trick. This had to be propaganda. They would show the women kindness for a few days, take photographs, and then the real treatment would begin. That evening, an American guard came to their barracks and told them in broken German that dinner would be served in 1 hour. The women walked together to a long wooden building that served as the mess hall. Inside, tables stood in neat rows. The smell of cooking food filled the air, real food that made their stomachs growl with hunger they had learned to ignore. American soldiers stood behind a serving counter, wearing white aprons over their uniforms. They held large spoons and waited as the women formed a line. Greta reached the front of the line and held out her metal tray. A young American soldier, who could not have been more than 19 years old, smiled at her and placed something on her plate. Greta looked down and froze. Golden yellow corn, still on the cob, glistened with melted butter. The kernels were fat and perfect, arranged in neat rows. Steam rose from the hot ears of corn. Greta felt rage rise in her chest. She turned to the other women and laughed, a hard, bitter sound. She held up her tray for everyone to see and spoke loudly in German so all the women could hear. "Das ist Tierfutter," she announced. "That is animal feed. Look what they give us. They think we are pigs. In Germany, we feed this to chickens and cows, not to people." The other women began to laugh too, some nervously, some with genuine amusement. Corn was peasant food, animal food. Everyone in Germany knew that. Only Americans, in their ignorance and their backwards ways, would serve such a thing to human beings and think it was a proper meal. But even as Greta laughed, even as she mocked the golden corn sitting on her tray, her stomach twisted with hunger. And somewhere deep in her mind, a small voice whispered a question she did not want to hear. If Americans are so stupid and weak, why do they have so much food that they can give animal feed to their prisoners? The camp commander, a gray-haired man with calm eyes, stood near the serving line watching the women laugh at the corn. He did not look angry or insulted. He simply waited until the laughter died down, then spoke in careful German through Frau Schneider. "You do not have to eat it," he said quietly. "But you might be surprised." Then he walked away, leaving the women holding their trays and their mockery. Greta sat at a table with 5 other women, the corn still untouched on her plate. Her stomach growled so loudly that Liesel, sitting across from her, looked up with worried eyes. They had been given other food too, potatoes, some kind of meat and gravy, bread with real butter, and green beans. But the corn sat there like a yellow insult, steam still rising from its kernels. Greta watched as Liesel picked up her ear of corn with both hands, the way you might hold something precious or dangerous. Liesel brought it close to her face and sniffed. Her eyes widened slightly. Then, so quietly that almost no one noticed, she took a small bite. Liesel's face changed. Her eyes closed. She chewed slowly, and a sound came from her throat, almost like a sigh. She took another bite, bigger this time. Butter ran down her chin, and she did not care. She ate half the ear of corn before she realized that everyone at the table was staring at her. "It is sweet," Liesel whispered. "It tastes like butter and sunshine. It is not animal feed at all." One by one, the other women picked up their corn. The first bites came with shame, as if they were admitting defeat. But after that first taste, shame disappeared. The corn was sweet and tender and rich. The butter melted into every kernel. It tasted like something from before the war, from childhood summers when food was simple and good and plentiful. Greta was the last to try it. She bit into the corn with her jaw clenched, ready to prove everyone wrong. But her mouth filled with sweetness and salt and warmth, and something inside her chest cracked just a little. She finished the entire ear and did not say a word. The next morning, breakfast arrived at 6 o'clock. The women lined up again, expecting bread and weak coffee like they got on the ship. Instead, American soldiers piled their plates with scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, toast with jam, and fried potatoes. A large pitcher sat on each table filled with orange juice so bright it looked like liquid sunshine. Greta poured a glass and drank it in 3 gulps. The sweetness exploded on her tongue. She had not tasted an orange in 4 years. In Germany, oranges were memories from before the war, things mothers told children about like fairy tales. Real coffee came in metal pots, dark and strong, and there was white sugar to put in it. Not the brown ersatz coffee made from acorns that Germans drank. Real coffee. Greta put 3 spoons of sugar in her cup because she could, because the sugar bowl was full, and no one stopped her. She drank it and felt warmth spread through her whole body. After 1 week, the women had gained back some of the weight they had lost. Their faces filled out. Their uniforms fit better. They stopped looking like skeletons in gray cloth and started looking like people again. Then, on a hot Tuesday afternoon, they heard a sound that made everyone run to the windows. A white truck drove through the camp gates with painted words on the side. Music played from a speaker on the roof, cheerful and tinny. The truck stopped in the center of the camp, and an American soldier jumped out. Smiling. Frau Schneider translated the announcement. "Ice cream," she said, her voice flat with disbelief. "They are giving out ice cream." The women formed a line, silent now, past the point of laughter. Each woman received a paper cup filled with vanilla ice cream, cold and smooth and impossibly rich. Some had never tasted ice cream before. Others had not eaten it since they were children. Liesel ate hers with a small wooden spoon, making it last as long as possible. When she finished, she held the empty cup against her forehead to feel the last bit of coldness. Why do they have frozen dessert in the middle of a war? She asked no one in particular. No one had an answer. The following week, Greta and 12 other women were assigned to work in the camp kitchen. An American sergeant, a large woman with strong arms and a kind face, showed them around. The kitchen had 6 enormous gas stoves that all worked at the same time. 3 refrigerators hummed in the corner, keeping milk and meat and vegetables cold. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with canned goods, tomatoes, beans, peaches, pears, soup. Greta counted the cans while pretending to sweep. She stopped counting at 200. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sergeant opened one of the refrigerators to show them where to store the milk. Cold air poured out, and inside Greta saw more food than her entire neighborhood in Hamburg had seen in a year. Chickens wrapped in paper, blocks of butter, dozens of eggs in cardboard containers, fresh lettuce, carrots, and celery. The sergeant closed the door like it was nothing special. Like everyone had refrigerators full of food during their break. The women sat at a table in the kitchen, and the sergeant gave them each a bottle of Coca-Cola from a wooden crate. The dark liquid fizzed and bubbled. Greta had heard of Coca-Cola from before the war, but had never tried it. She took a sip and the bubbles burned her throat in a pleasant way. It was sweet and sharp and completely unlike anything she had ever tasted. She drank the whole bottle and wondered how a country could make special drinks, just for fun while fighting a war on two sides of the world. Letters from home began arriving in September. Liesel got one from her mother, written on thin paper in shaky handwriting. Her mother wrote about eating soup made from nettles picked in the forest. She wrote about trading her wedding ring for a loaf of bread. She wrote about neighbors who had died from hunger during the winter. Liesel read the letter 3 times, then looked at the lunch tray in front of her. Thick vegetable soup, a sandwich made with real ham, an apple, and cookies. She pushed the tray away and put her head in her hands. Greta noticed that the American guards ate in the same mess hall as the prisoners. They stood in the same food line. They got the same portions. One day she watched a young guard, a boy who looked about 17, sit at a table near them and eat his lunch. He had the same corn, the same potatoes, the same meat. In Germany, officers ate different food than enlisted men. Everyone ate different food based on their rank and importance. But here, the guards and the prisoners ate the same meals. Greta could not understand it. The camp had a small library in one of the buildings. Frau Schneider went there often to read American newspapers and practice her English. One afternoon she found a magazine with photographs of American factories. She saw assembly lines making cars, mile after mile of machinery and workers. She saw charts showing production numbers, tanks, planes, ships, all built in numbers that seemed impossible. She brought the magazine back to show Greta and Liesel. "Look at this," Frau Schneider said, pointing to a photograph of workers leaving a factory at the end of their shift. Thousands of people. Just one factory. And look at the parking lot. Every worker has a car. That night, lying in her bed with clean sheets and a soft pillow, Greta stared at the ceiling and let herself think the dangerous thought she had been pushing away for weeks. If Americans had this much during war, how much did they have during peace? And if they had so much, why did her leaders tell her that Germany was winning? Why did they say America was weak and decadent when America could feed its prisoners better than Germany fed its own soldiers? In the darkness, she heard Liesel whisper from the next bed, "Greta, do you think we were lied to about everything?" Greta did not answer. But she knew the answer was yes. November came cold and gray. Even in Texas, the women had been in the camp for 3 months now, and their bodies had changed. They no longer looked hollow and hungry. Their cheeks had color. Their eyes were brighter. But something deeper was changing too, something harder to see but impossible to ignore. On the 3rd Thursday of November, the camp commander announced through Frau Schneider that they would celebrate an American holiday called Thanksgiving. The women would eat a special meal with the American soldiers and staff. The mess hall had been decorated with orange and yellow paper leaves. Long tables were pushed together to make room for everyone. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the women entered and saw what waited for them. Whole turkeys, golden brown and glistening, sat on platters down the center of each table. Steam rose from bowls of mashed potatoes so white and fluffy they looked like clouds. Gravy in ceramic boats. Stuffing that smelled of herbs and butter. Sweet potatoes topped with melted marshmallows. Cranberry sauce that wobbled and shined. Green beans with almonds. Dinner rolls so soft they pulled apart in your fingers. And pies, so many pies, pumpkin, apple, and pecan, lined up on a side table like treasures. Greta sat down and stared at the feast. Her hands shook. This was more food than her entire family had seen on Christmas before the war, back when Germany was still whole and hopeful. An American soldier sat across from her, a man about 30 years old with tired eyes and a kind smile. He began serving the food, putting slices of turkey on plates, spooning potatoes and stuffing, passing bowls around the table like they were at a family dinner. Frau Schneider stood near the front of the hall and translated as the camp commander spoke about the meaning of Thanksgiving. He talked about being grateful, about sharing food with others, about remembering that even in hard times there were reasons to give thanks. Greta picked up her fork but could not eat. She looked at her plate piled high with food, more food than one person should have, and thought about the letters from home. Letters that described children with swollen bellies from hunger. Letters that told of old people dying in cold apartments because there was no fuel and no food. Letters that spoke of a homeland that was broken and starving. And here she sat, a prisoner, an enemy, eating turkey and marshmallows and pie dot. The tears came before she could stop them. They ran down her face and fell onto her plate, mixing with the gravy. Her shoulders shook. Liesel reached across the table and took her hand, and Liesel was crying too. All around the hall, women wept quietly into their napkins. They cried because the food was beautiful. They cried because they were grateful. But mostly they cried because they understood, finally and completely, that everything they had been told was a lie. They had been taught that they were the strong ones, the superior ones, the ones chosen to rule. But the strong do not starve their own people. The superior do not need to lie. And those chosen to rule do not end up broken and hungry while their enemies live in plenty. Frau Schneider sat down heavily in a chair, her face wet with tears. "We were starving our own people," she said quietly to no one and everyone. "We were starving them while calling these people weak and soft. What have we done?" The following week, the camp began offering education classes. A teacher came 3 times a week to talk about history and government and what had really happened during the war. The teacher was a woman named Mrs. Weber, about 50 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a bun. She spoke perfect German because she had been born in Germany and had moved to America when she was 25 years old. On her first day, she told the women her story. She had left Germany in 1920 because she wanted freedom and opportunity. She had worked in a bakery in New York, learned English, married an American man, and raised 3 children. Her eldest son had fought in France and helped liberate prison camps. Mrs. Weber brought photographs to class one cold December morning. She laid them out on a table without saying anything at first. The photographs showed places the women had heard whispered about, but never fully believed. Camps with barbed wire and guard towers, but not prisoner of war camps like the one they lived in. These camps were different. These camps had rooms that looked like showers, but were not showers. These camps had ovens built for burning bodies. These camps had piles of shoes and glasses and hair. These camps had people who were just bones covered in skin, people who looked like they had been dead for weeks, but were somehow still alive. "This is Dachau," Mrs. Weber said, her voice steady but hard. "American soldiers found it in April. This is Bergen-Belsen. This is Buchenwald." She pointed to each photograph. "These camps were in Germany. Some of you may have lived near them." Many of the women turned away. Some said it could not be real, that the photographs were fake, that Americans were making up stories to make Germany look evil. But Liesel stared at the pictures for a long time. She had been a nurse. She knew what death looked like. She knew what starvation looked like. These photographs were real. She could see it in the eyes of the people behind the wire, in the way their bodies bent, in the emptiness of their faces. "I did not know," Liesel whispered. "I worked in a hospital. I helped wounded soldiers. I did not know this was happening." Mrs. Weber looked at her with eyes that were sad but not unkind. "Many people did not know," she said. "But not knowing does not mean it did not happen. Now you know. Now you must decide what you will do with this knowledge." That night, Greta sat at the small table between her bed and Liesel's bed. She had been given a notebook and a pencil by one of the guards. She opened the notebook and began to write. Her handwriting was shaky at first, but then the words came faster. She wrote, "I called corn animal feed and mocked their plenty. I laughed at their kindness and thought it was weakness. I believed every lie they told us because believing was easier than thinking. Now I understand. We fed our people lies while they fed their hope. We built camps for death while they built camps for prisoners who got ice cream on Tuesday afternoons. I do not know who I am anymore. Everything I knew was wrong." Christmas came with more food and more kindness. A church group from the nearby town brought presents wrapped in bright paper, scarves, gloves, chocolates, and books. The women opened the gifts with trembling hands, unable to understand why American civilians would give gifts to German prisoners. An old woman from the church, small and white-haired, hugged Liesel and said in broken German, "You are far from home. Everyone should have something nice at Christmas." One evening, the guards brought a record player to the recreation building and played music. Jazz music with trumpets and drums and a rhythm that made your feet want to move. Some of the younger guards showed the women how to dance the American way, with big movements and laughter. Greta watched from the corner, her arms crossed, but her foot tapped along with the beat without her permission. The music was wild and free and completely uncontrolled, nothing like the marshes and folk songs she had known in Germany. But it was also joyful in a way she had forgotten music could be. Late one night, Greta and Liesel and Frau Schneider sat together in the barracks after the lights were supposed to be out. They spoke in whispers, sharing thoughts they had kept hidden even from themselves. "What does it mean?" Liesel asked. "That the people we call decadent and weak have treated us better than our own leaders ever did?" Frau Schneider was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "It means that real strength is not about crushing others. Real strength is having so much that you can share it, even with your enemies. They did not have to be kind to us. They chose to be. That is power we never understood." Greta lay in her bed and thought about the corn she had mocked, the ice cream that appeared on hot afternoons, the turkey on Thanksgiving, the gifts from strangers at Christmas. She thought about American soldiers who ate the same food as prisoners. She thought about factories that made cars for ordinary workers. She thought about a country so rich and strong that it could fight wars on two sides of the world and still have Coca-Cola trucks driving around giving out free sodas. She had spent her whole life being told that Germans were the best, the strongest, the chosen people. But lying here in a clean bed with a full stomach in a prisoner of war camp in Texas, she finally understood the truth. Strength was not about how loud you shouted or how many people you could control. Strength was about building something so good that even your enemies could not help but see it. That was what America had. And that was what Germany had lost. Spring 1946, the women boarded ships again, this time heading east across the Atlantic toward home. But home was not the same place they had left. The war was over. Germany had surrendered. The camps had been liberated. The cities had been bombed into rubble. Everything they knew was gone, replaced by something broken and hungry and ashamed. The women stood on the deck as the ship pulled away from New York Harbor, watching the tall buildings disappear into mist. Each woman carried a small bag of belongings, but also something invisible and heavier, the knowledge of what they had seen, what they had learned, and what they could never forget. Greta's bag held 3 photographs of the camp, a recipe card for cornbread written in English by one of the kitchen workers, and a small cloth sack of corn seeds. An American guard had given her the seeds 2 days before she left. Plant them when you get home, he had said through Frau Schneider. They grow easy, even in bad soil. When they come up, remember that good things can grow anywhere if you give them a chance. Greta had nodded and tucked the seeds deep into her bag, where they would stay safe during the journey. Liesel carried seeds too, and also a notebook filled with her own handwriting. She had written down everything she wanted to remember: the taste of orange juice, the sound of jazz music, the feel of ice cream melting on her tongue, the kindness of strangers who brought Christmas gifts. She had written down Mrs. Weber's words about strength and freedom. She had written down her own thoughts about what it meant to be wrong about everything you believed. The notebook was her most precious possession now, more valuable than any jewelry or money could ever be. The ship journey took 16 days, much longer than the trip to America. The women were quiet during the voyage. They played cards sometimes and talked about small things, but they did not talk about what they would find when they arrived. That truth was too heavy to speak out loud. The ship docked in Hamburg in early April. Spring rain fell cold and gray as the women walked down the gangway onto German soil. The smell hit them first: smoke and dust and something rotten underneath. Then they saw what had become of their city. Buildings stood like broken teeth, walls with no roofs, windows with no glass. Piles of bricks lined the streets where neighborhoods used to be. Children in ragged clothes picked through rubble looking for anything useful. Old women pushed carts made from wood and wheels taken from destroyed vehicles. No one smiled. No one looked up. Everyone just moved through the ruins like ghosts haunting a graveyard. Greta walked through streets she had known her whole life but could not recognize anymore. The bakery where her mother bought bread every Saturday was gone, just a hole in the ground filled with broken concrete. The school she attended as a child had no walls left, only the front steps leading to nothing. She walked for 2 hours, carrying her bag, searching for the apartment building where she had lived with her parents and younger brother. When she found the address, she stopped and stared. The building was still standing, but barely. The top 2 floors were missing, blown away by bombs. The windows were empty black squares. The door hung crooked on one hinge. She climbed the stairs slowly, her footsteps echoing in the damaged stairwell. Her family had lived on the 2nd floor, and when she reached the landing, she found the door to her apartment open. Inside, everything was gone. The furniture, the curtains, the pictures on the walls, all taken or destroyed. But she heard voices coming from somewhere below, from the basement. She followed the sound down narrow stairs into the cellar. Her mother sat on a wooden crate in the dim light of a single candle. She looked 20 years older than when Greta had last seen her, her hair completely white now, her face lined and thin. Her father sat beside her mother, his shoulders bent, his hands shaking slightly. Her brother was not there. Greta would learn later that he had died in the final days of the war, shot during the defense of Berlin. But in this moment, seeing her parents alive, she dropped her bag and ran to them. They held each other and cried, and no one spoke for a long time. Finally, her mother pulled back and looked at Greta's face, touching her cheeks with trembling fingers. "You are healthy," her mother whispered. "You have color in your face. They fed you?" Greta nodded. She opened her bag and pulled out the items she had brought from America. A care package from the American Red Cross, given to each woman before they left. A can of coffee, chocolate bars, powdered milk, and 2 cans of corn. She placed them on a small table made from an old door balanced on bricks. Her mother picked up the can of corn and turned it over in her hands, reading the English words she could not understand. "What is this?" her mother asked. "Corn," Greta said quietly. "Sweet corn. In America, they eat it all the time. They gave it to us, even though we were prisoners. They gave us so much food, Moody. Every day, more food than I had seen in years." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. The tears ran down her cheeks and fell onto the can of corn she held against her chest. You learn to eat like Americans? She whispered. Greta took her mother's hands and held them tight. Muhi, I learned to think like Americans. I learned that everything we were told was a lie. I learned that the people we called weak were strong, and we who called ourselves strong had nothing. I learned what real power looks like, and it is not what they taught us. Over the following weeks, Greta found work helping to clear rubble from the streets. The pay was almost nothing, but it was something. She lived with her parents in the cellar and tried to help them survive. She used the American coffee sparingly, making it last for weeks, brewing it weak and sharing it with neighbors who had nothing. She saved the corn seeds and waited for the right time to plant them. In May, when the weather warmed and the danger of frost passed, Greta found a small patch of dirt behind the destroyed building. She cleared away the bricks and rubble, dug into the soil with her bare hands, and planted the corn seeds in neat rows, just like the American Guard had shown her. She watered them with water carried up from a broken pipe in the street. She pulled weeds and waited. The corn grew. Green shoots pushed up through the dark German soil, reaching toward the sun. The stalks grew tall and strong, and by August they had ears of corn hanging heavy and full. Greta picked the first ear, peeled back the husk, and saw the golden kernels inside. She boiled water over a small fire in the cellar and cooked the corn. She served it to her parents with a tiny bit of butter she had traded for. Her mother bit into the corn and closed her eyes, and Greta saw her mother smile for the first time since she had come home. Lisa went back to Bavaria and found her village, half destroyed but still standing. Her parents had survived by eating whatever they could find in the forest. She hugged them and cried, and then she began to rebuild her life. She could not work as a nurse anymore. The memories of the war were too painful. Instead, she became a teacher at the small village school. She never told her students about her time in the Nazi auxiliary forces. She never spoke about the prison camp in Texas, but every summer, she planted corn in her garden behind her small house. When the corn grew tall and the ears ripened, she would pick one and eat it slowly. Remembering what she had learned about kindness and abundance and truth. Frau Schneider stayed in Hamburg and found work with the American occupation forces as a translator. She helped American soldiers communicate with German civilians. She helped distribute food and medicine. She worked on reconstruction projects, translating plans for new buildings, new schools, new hope. When German people complained about the Americans, she would look at them with her tired eyes and say quietly, "They treated me better as their prisoner than our own leaders treated us as citizens. Remember that before you speak." Years passed. Germany rebuilt itself slowly, painfully, but surely. The children who grew up in the rubble became adults who built new cities. The country that had chosen war learned to choose peace. The people who had believed lies learned to ask questions. And in small gardens all across Germany, corn grew in the summer. Planted by women who remembered what they had learned in captivity. In 1978, a university student came to interview Greta for a project about the war. Greta was 60 years old now, her hair gray, her hands worn from decades of work. She sat in her small apartment and told her story. At the end, the student asked her what the most important moment of the war had been for her. Greta thought for a long moment, looking out the window at the rebuilt city. Then she said, "That corn changed my life. Not because it was delicious, though it was, but because I had to ask myself why the people we called weak had plenty, while we who called ourselves strong had nothing. The answer destroyed everything I had been taught. Sometimes the most important lessons come wrapped in butter and humility. That is what I tasted that day, not animal feed, but the first bite of truth. Real strength is not about taking from others. Real strength is building something so good, so abundant, that you have enough to share even with your enemies. That is what I learned in Texas. That is what I tried to teach my children. That is what Germany forgot and had to learn again the hard way." She paused and smiled, A small sad smile full of memory and wisdom. Every summer I still plant corn in my window box. When I eat it, I remember that I was wrong about everything. And I am grateful that I lived long enough to learn what being wrong taught me. Being wrong saved my life, because it taught me how to finally see the truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.